with Batman Returns, a lot of, at that time, at least, I know that it's got more of a cult following now.
Mm-hmm.
And even a cult following as it being a Christmas film. But I think that a lot of people at the time were kind of focused on, you know, the darker elements of the plot without really thinking about how campy that some of the stuff is in the film. And it's 100% a Tim Burton movie.
There's fucking penguins with rockets on their back.
And they have little missile guidance systems too that go over their eyes. It's so cute.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
But it's, I mean, the original, as great as it is, and I love it, and have seen it probably, you know, more than double the amount of times I've actually seen Batman Returns, simply because I watched it about 50 times in that year directly after it came out. But as much as I love the original Batman, that's more of like a big budget blockbuster movie and not so much a Tim Burton movie. And as you mentioned in the intro, like Tim Burton had the juice to say, hey, if I'm going to come back for a sequel, I want to do it my way, and I want to do it, you know, I want the story to be how I want the story to be.
Yep.
I want to do all kinds of stuff with this. And I don't want any interference from you guys, which is what he had on the original. He had a lot of interference from the producers. So I told you that we couldn't talk about Batman Returns without first talking about Batman.
Yeah.
And kind of getting into just what its legacy was, because I as someone who, you know, was around at that point in time, I cannot tell you just how big that movie was. Just that whole summer was dominated by Batman. And it's, I mean, looking at my notes here, these are the movies that came out in the summer of 1989. Like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Ghostbusters 2, Lethal Weapon 2, Do the Right Thing, Black Rain, which I think is a really underrated Ridley Scott movie, License to Kill, a James Bond movie. Like those were all really big hits. And like Batman came out in June of that summer and just destroyed the competition and just dominated the box office throughout that entire summer, and was, in the end, it was the biggest movie of that year. But the impact that it had is pretty crazy. The impact that it had on the film industry. It was the biggest opening weekend ever for a film. A bit of trivia: do you know what the previous two movies that were the biggest openings were? Dude, the biggest opening weekend record was set. I don't know what the previous holder was. I didn't get that far in my research. But the biggest box office, or biggest opening weekend at the box office record, got set on Memorial Day weekend of that year by Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Really?
Yeah, it set, I think it did almost 30 million over the weekend, and then 37 million over that 4-day holiday weekend. And then, like 3 weeks later, Ghostbusters 2 comes out and opens up to 29.5 million. So Indiana Jones had 29.3. It's just under 30 as I'm looking at the stats here. So Indiana Jones sets the record. 3 weeks later, Ghostbusters 2 sets a record. The following weekend, Batman opens up and sets the record.
Huh.
And Batman opened up at 40 million for the weekend. And it set the record because it made 100 million in just under 11 days. So it was the fastest to 100 million. Its second weekend was 30 million. It made a shit ton of money that summer, and its opening weekend and the following weekend were huge. for movies that, for an industry that hadn't seen numbers like that before. Nowadays, in the good days when movies used to open up in theaters, big movies used to open up in theaters. Now they make 150 million, 200 million in their opening weekend. This type of movie.
Yeah.
But to make 40 million in the opening weekend was mind blowing 30 years ago. So it comes out, it dominates everything. The impact that it has on the film industry is like, instead of a movie coming out and just building an audience like they used to, Jaws opens up like that, where it's big, but it has staying power.
Mm-hmm.
It might make more money down the road than it did on its opening weekend. The Exorcist was like that. Star Wars obviously is like that. But now the focus is on the opening weekend. The opening weekend is kind of like the do or die for a film. And if it doesn't make good money on its opening weekend, it's extremely rare that it's going to top that. It's only downhill after the opening weekend. And especially now with more movies coming out regularly, 3, 4, 5 big movies every single weekend in, the holidays or in summertime, you have to make all of your money on opening weekend, because you're going to get killed by the competition next week. So the opening weekend was like this main focus, and Batman changed that, where the opening weekend is the important weekend, and everything else doesn't really matter. Because it was such a huge movie, and because it dominated everything, movies used to come out on video like 6, 7, 8 months, maybe even a year after it was in the theater.
Yeah, it would take forever. I remember that.
Yeah. Batman came out, I think it was out by November, by Thanksgiving time, which was unheard of at the time because they would be so long, but it just took, about 5 months to come out on video. And it was huge on video. Even the television window, or the window of time for when it airs on television, was shortened because of Batman. Because they want to put these big movies on TV and on cable to get more people to watch them. Another thing that was really the main focus, because when Batman came out, remember the PG-13 rating was only about 4 or 5 years old, because that was created in the mid '80s
because of things like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins and these movies that ride. They're in that gray area in the middle.
Yep, right? Those two movies in the summer of 1984, because Gremlins is 84, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, those two movies in the summer of 1984 are the catalyst for the PG-13 rating because of the violence in them. So the PG-13 rating was only about 5 years old by the time Batman came out, but because Batman was the big hit, it really pushed that importance, and we see it even nowadays of the PG-13 rating. That's your target rating for maximum success, because you can get everyone in to see it, and you don't have to worry about, minors can't go watch the R-rated movie, at least by themselves. If a theater worth its salt is checking, as they should be sometimes. But nowadays, that's why most every single movie, big movies, are rated PG-13. It's very rare that a movie like this will take a chance on an R rating. And I know that, we've talked about some before, and I think you guys even touched on that last week with the R-rated comic book movies, but PG-13 is what the majority of them will be rated, I can guarantee you. So it kind of changed the film industry with its success, and like you had mentioned, Burton really didn't want to come back to do a sequel. And then a lot of that had to do with his experience on making the first one.
But also, when you've had like a monumental success, as you were talking about just now, with his first film, it's kind of suicide in a sense to try to take on, especially such a big, bold sequel, in hopes to kind of live up to the original. But
there's are you going to make a big hit, another big hit like that? It's, who knows? You could, or you might not. The chances are you probably won't. I mean, even The Empire Strikes Back wasn't as successful as Star Wars, and The Empire Strikes Back is by far a superior film.
Yeah.
But it did not make as much money. So Burton really didn't want to come back, and like you said, it was, if I'm going to come back, I want to do it my way, and I want to do it with as little interference as possible. So he says, "Hey." Yeah, I mean, because he's not even a big fan of Batman, of his work on Batman. He's just kind of like, yeah, it's like whatever. It's a whatever movie. I think it's kind of boring. I like certain parts of it, but I'm not huge on it. But that was, that movie, whether he really cares for it or not, gave him the clout to do whatever he wanted, basically, after that. Which is very weird, because he follows up Batman with Edward Scissorhands, which is the movie that he wanted to make, but for some reason Warner Brothers didn't want to do it.
Didn't he make Edward Scissorhands in between Batman and Batman Returns? Or
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, but most of his films, most of them were with Warner Brothers. Up to that point, they were all with Warner Brothers, his first 3 films. But for some reason, they didn't want to make Edward Scissorhands, which is obviously more of a personal film for him. It's a smaller budget. He's got more control on it. But I don't know why Warner Brothers turned him down after he made a shit ton of money for them. But he makes it for 20th Century Fox. And then I think because Warner Brothers wanted a sequel so badly, they said, okay, we'll, whatever demands you have to make a sequel, we'll go along with it. Which is, is good for Burton, because he got what he wanted. I'm sure that, they could have hired someone else to make a Batman sequel, but as we see a few years later, hiring someone else to make the Batman sequel totally changes the tone and the style that Burton had set with the first 2.
Yeah, but I think that Warner Brothers did get scared with the backlash of Batman Returns, which caused them to go even more bonkers, like in the aesthetic and more towards the cartoony side,
Yeah, exactly. It's the backlash from Batman Returns being too violent, too dark. Even though I'll probably mention it again later, but the violence in the film, I don't think that it's any more violent than the original.
Yeah, it's odd that I feel like everybody just accepts the Nicholson's movie, and they're like, yeah, it's great, and then Batman Returns gets all of this shit talking on it, but there's only a handful of questionable things anyway.
The first one had that complaint too, that it's too dark, it's too violent, but when you watch them back to back, as you did, and I didn't rewatch the first one in doing this, but I know it well enough that I would honestly, like, the first one is, I think, even more violent.
Yeah, it feels more sinister, right?
Yeah, but I do